Hello and welcome to episode 23 of the Adamola Bookman podcast. I'm Al Bond and I'm here with my friend John Coughlin. Hi, Johnny.
Hi, Al. How you doing?
Good fella. And this week we're doing full-time The Secret Life of Tony Cascarino. So then, Johnny, this is one for you, isn't it, really? This is one of your brave boys. Back from the 90s, eh? Back when everything was great in Irish football.
Yeah, the halcyon days of Irish football, yeah. What would he have meant to the average English football fan?
I thought he was just a shit striker. He was just one of those. He was there or thereabouts, mainly on the bench. The sort of player that's like, I hope he never signs for my team, which is harsh. Overwhelmingly, what I got from this is that Tony Cascarino was really shit at football.
Yeah, I was going to ask you thought he was a shit footballer. Do you think he's any better now, having read the book?
No, I mean, now he agrees with me. He agrees with me. He thinks he's a shit footballer.
I would say this book, more than any that we've done in the past, the profile of the book so far exceeds the profile of the player in a way. This book is 24 years old, and Cascarino wasn't in Ireland, obviously, he has a certain reputation, and he was around for those particularly exciting times. But as a player, he's pretty ordinary. So it is quite remarkable that this book has survived for so long.
Well, I read this book, I think, when it came out about 25 years ago, because it was famed for being particularly honest and the no bullshit. It's all straightforward what he really felt. Before I get into what I think about that, Johnny, what do you guys in Ireland think of Tony Cascarino?
It's funny about Cascarino because he's part of that cadre of players under Charlton that went to the World Cup in 1990 and in 1984, although he was injured. And he's much loved, I think, because he's this ultimately English-Italian guy playing for Ireland. Obviously, there's a novelty factor there. And he was there through all those. And I think he's quite liked in terms of his personality as well. But unlike a lot of the other Irish players of that profile, he doesn't have a particularly iconic moment in the way someone like Ray Houghton famously would have done, scoring against England, scoring against Italy. Cascarino did score against England, but it wasn't at a major competition. So it's funny, he's there, he's amongst that group, but he wouldn't be remembered in footage in the same way others would have been. And you see when you read back, he says it himself. At one point in the book, he describes a moment that put him on the bench. Jack Charlton got pissed off at him, and then he listed his, like, the next 20 games or something where he was coming on in the 78th minute, the 61st minute or whatever. So he was more of a sub, I guess, ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about him scoring goals, and honestly, I can't picture one single Tony Cascarino goal in my head at any point. Well, I can't remember him scoring a significant goal.
The people of Marseille and Nancy, of course, would see things very differently. Tony Goal, which is such a rubbish name.
Tony, second division goal. All right, Johnny, so you say, and I think you're right, this book has an outsized place in the football autobiography pantheon. Well, why do you think that is?
Two things, I think. One is, you mentioned it, the honesty of the book. The book is as much about his personal life as it is about his failed marriage. Ultimately, it's very candid in that regard. He talks about the stuff about him not having qualified for Ireland and stuff like that. So it's very honest, and there is interesting details in there. But the second is, and it's related, I think, is the person who wrote it. The guy who wrote this with Tony Cascarino is Paul Kimmage. He was he was a Tour de France cyclist, and he would be kind of similar character to Dunphy, maybe, in a way. Isn't that he was a sportsman who became a journalist, but he's famous. He represented Ireland in the Olympics, but he's probably most famous for being one of the journalists that really went after Lance Armstrong. So I think Kimmage was probably only interested, and like Cascarino talks about, Kimmage talks about it in the preface to the book. He was only really interested because the way Cascarino presented this book. Because when Cascarino went to him originally, it seems like Kimmage was saying, look, in all fairness, Tony, who's going to be interested in your book? But so it's those two things. Kimmage was interested because Cascarino was willing to write a book that was different than football autobiographies, generally speaking. But I think also Kimmage probably really helped. He really brought a lot of that out of Cascarino. But yeah, I think those two things are what made this book particularly, it's a great book, I think, and it's a different book. And like you, I had read this book, not when it came out initially, but maybe 5 or 10 years afterwards. And I enjoyed it then, and I was happy to go back and read it again.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Paul Kimmage from, mainly broadsheets. But yes, I'm certainly familiar with the name. And it is well written, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's it. The hook was the huge bombshell that, after all, Tony Cascarino didn't really qualify to play for Ireland. It's not that much of a bombshell, is it, Johnny? Because he sort of did qualify to play for Ireland.
So the whole thing, right, centres around the fact that Cascarino's mother was adopted. So his link to his Irish-born grandfather didn't exist, at least in any kind of biological sense. But is that still the rule? Because it seems ridiculous, like if you're adopted, is that how that works in football? Because you can get a passport.
You can have had a weekend in a city and you qualify for that country nowadays, wouldn't you? Yeah, he's absolutely nuts. Of course he qualifies for Ireland. And his granddad, an Irishman, adopted a kid.
Yeah.
Come on.
So, sorry, Cascarino said he didn't know this and he didn't realise that he didn't qualify for a passport when he made the initial application, and it only kind of came up later, and his mother only told him towards the end of his career. But I'm not sure I believe Cascarino, because later on he's a bit of a snaky, he's a bit sneaky sometimes. Like later on he goes to Marseille and he's worried, he's forever dyeing his hair. He's obsessed with keeping his youthful appearance because he says this is important in football. But he also doctors his passport.
With a biro.
With a biro.
Yeah, technologically genius. Just he turns a 2 into a 3, right?
Yeah. Anyway, the point is that obviously he I think in anyone's eyes really he would have qualified anyway. I don't know if they've changed the rules since, but putting that aside, he is a bit sneaky.
Well, I think he is a bit sneaky, frankly, because the other side of this book, well, there's two more sort of hooks, I think, and one is he's very honest in how he talks about the breakup of his marriage and his shortcomings as a man, or is he? And the other part of it is there's a lot of talk about his insecurities as a footballer. And it keeps coming back to there's this little voice in his head that is always working against him, especially when he's playing. How did you find that, Johnny?
I thought it was good. I thought it was good for the purposes of exposition. Is that the word I'm looking for in film? Exposition?
I think so.
In the Phil Pullman series, the daemons.
Yeah.
The little animals that they're talking with. Apparently Pullman only came up with that idea because he needed something for the character to speak to, so you could learn about the character's thoughts. So as a literary device, the little voice is quite good. But surely everybody has that, no?
I thought that got really old, really fast. I thought the first time he's bearing down on goal and there's a little voice in his head and he's having a little argument with it as he's bearing down on goal, and you think, yeah, that must be difficult. But he repeats this trick again and again and again. And it's always the same. It's always the same. Like he's about to shoot and he's like, oh, you're rubbish. You're rubbish. And he's fine with that. And sometimes it goes in and sometimes it goes out. And apparently the little voice has no real control over that either. Because sometimes it does go in even though the little voice is there. What animal would Tony Cascarino's daemon be then?
That's a good question. I don't know, something languid and lumbering.
And horny.
It's too easy to say something like a giraffe, I suppose.
I would say a donkey.
It's less flattering.
A little donkey talking to him like, you're a fucking donkey. Oh, I suppose I am.
Okay, well, sure. I guess that's kind of... oh, by the way, let me just say, let me state from the outset, I meant to say at the very beginning, we had a complaint, Al. A listener complaint.
Well, that doesn't seem right.
I failed to mention in our last episode, episode 22, Garincha, that book was recommended to us by a listener called Barry Coughlin, whose name might indicate some connection to me. But that recommender has now become a complainer because I failed to mention it in the previous episode.
I'd already had the idea, Barry, to do the Garincha book. It's old news, mate. But thanks anyway.
Lots of cranks out there in Radio Land.
We've been planning this for years, the Garincha book. You take no credit, Barry, none.
Yeah, okay, all right. Yeah, so let's move on. Let's talk about Cascarino full-time.
He was born in, what was the name of the place he was born, Johnny?
St. Paul's Cray in Kent.
It's very insulting to St. Paul, isn't it? Like St. Paul's Cray. No, he's not. Do kids still say Cray? Probably not.
Probably not. Well, I suppose the book doesn't actually start with his childhood, does it? We find him at the beginning in France, afraid, worried, depressed at the tail end of his career. He's praying in France for Nancy, having left his wife and his two sons to be with his French girlfriend who had given birth. And that the details around there are pretty sordid, actually, because his wife found out about the affair by finding a scan, and then Cascarino essentially made up some kind of bullshit and said that it wasn't true, that it was some fan was making up, it was kind of stalking him or something. So it was all a bit sordid there, wasn't it?
It's as sordid as fuck. I mean, it's gross. I don't know if he's trying to say, oh, look at me, I'm sorry. How old was she when he met her, Johnny?
Oh, I don't know.
20. How old was he? 38.
And
he was 18 when she was born. I mean, come on, son. And you left your wife and kids. Yeah, I bet you did. You fucking dickhead. Did you? I don't know if you went on his Wikipedia page. Like you say at the start of this book, he's at the end of his career and he's worried about what the future holds. But don't worry, mate. You've got a career in talk sport to come. It's just a depressing footballer's future. You're going to be on talk sport a lot. But anyway, do you see he was on talk sport once and he was removed from the studio for punching his co-host.
Oh, go on. I didn't see that.
Oh, didn't you? No. And do you know why he punched his co-host?
Tell me.
Because his co-host said live on air that he'd been chasing the 21-year-old intern around the office. Ha ha! When he was married to old Virginie.
Oh, golly. Oh, really?
Or who he refers to as Virginia, because he can't say her name, Virginie. Oh, Virginia's close enough. He bangs on about speaking French all the time in the first chapter. Oh, I speak French, but, oh yeah, my girlfriend, she's called Virginia. Because I can't fucking say Virginie. I'm pretty late.
Here's a question for you. Who did he write this book for, do you think?
Himself.
Do you think so?
Yes.
He says he's kind of writing it for his sons, right? Because he walks out in the family and writes a note. And I think this, he indicates, or he says, I can't remember if he says it explicitly, or he certainly indicates it a few times throughout, that this is kind of, I guess, an explanation to his kids.
An explanation to his kids. Well, I'm sure his kids will enjoy reading that their mother was good looking but not stunning. Oh, I met old Joe out there. What was her name again? Is it Sarah? Yeah. Sarah was good looking, not stunning though. Unlike Virginie, my new wife, who's 18 years younger. She's really gorgeous. Oh, and hang on a sec. Oh, let's stay on Cascarino's infidelities. So he talks about the first time, just before he's getting married, that he cheated on her. And he's in Ireland, right? And, you know, he's a big star in Ireland. Yeah. He's leaving a nightclub. He's trying to get into a taxi, and this chick throws herself at him. And what did he say? Your place or mine? She says to him, leaving me, and no doubt she wants my seed. Proofreader, just She wants to have sex. Oh, God. These girls want to straddle a champion. Straddle a champion? Oh, straddle. Oh, a horse. Awful.
Well, I suppose
Tony Cascarino is a horny motherfucker. And, that's how he puts it. It's like, oh, but all these women are throwing themselves at me. What would you do? You do the right thing, Tony. That's what you do. I think he wants the reader to be like, oh, well, poor Tony. What could he do in that situation? The young lady desperately wanted his seed, so he must provide. So gross.
Do you know what's, you say poor Tony. There was a real poor Tony moment in it, in the lead up to the World Cup in 1994. And they were in the hotel, wherever, somewhere in Ireland. And there was a mob of girls outside screaming up to the room. Tony sticks his head out the window and is absolutely heartbroken to learn that the young women are interested only in Phil Babb, Jason McAteer, and Gary Kelly, the three amigos as they were called at the time.
The world's shittest boy band. Gary Kelly's good looking now. What?
We've kind of underlined the kind of memorable parts of this book in a way, haven't we? Because the football, okay, for an Irish reader, it's interesting because it's harking back to these glory days. But for an English reader or for a reader from anywhere else, this is pretty dull stuff, I would imagine, the football stuff. It's the other stuff that's most memorable, really.
No, that's true. But I mean, in all fairness, Johnny, I ripped through this book. This is, I did enjoy it. I'm not saying, I don't think it was dull. It just wasn't particularly consequential.
Yeah, but like, if he's talking about Millwall, he's talking about Nancy, like that, like 25 years ago. 30, 40 years ago, that is pretty, inconsequential at this point. But from an Irish point of view, all of the stuff about the early 90s, Jack Charlton and that particular era is really fun and nostalgic for anyone from Ireland.
No, absolutely, I bet. And again, Johnny, as I say, I enjoyed it. I mean, it's an easy read. It's well written, and you could probably read it in the time it takes to watch a movie, right? I think I ripped through it in about 2.5 hours. Yeah,
well, you're a much faster reader than I am, but by my standards, I read it's a slim volume, and it's well written, and there are some good literary turns in this. You know what's a funny device in books is when chapters start with quotes, which is often fun because the quotes are often quite good, but it's also a bit lazy, isn't it?
I mean, the quotes, I wrote a couple of things about this because there's a point where he talks about he's packing a night bag for himself. He has to head off, and he describes what he puts in the bag, and he puts a copy of The Governor by Lenny McLean, which is one of those, fucking gangster books, like not my cup of tea at all. Like, and he mentions this book 3 times as well during the thing. So obviously it made an impression on him. But then the quote on the start of the chapter is like fucking Salman Rushdie or something.
Yeah,
but he's reading.
Yeah.
Yeah, so who put the quotes in at the top? That was you, wasn't it, Paul? It was you. I'm pretty sure Tony Cascarino has not read any Salman Rushdie.
Yeah, so the book kind of starts with the end. Cascarino's at this point in his life where his body is broken down, he's getting older, his marriage is broken down, and he doesn't know what he says he doesn't know what he's going to do in his retirement. What is interesting about this book is that you do get it's a window into his, he's very anxious at this point in his life. Now, it obviously all turned out fine, I'm sure. He's like, if you said he was on TalkSport, he fronts a lot of betting companies and stuff. Tony Bet, one of them. So,
he's a big card guy as well, isn't he, nowadays?
He's a semi-professional poker player. But he says, Charlton, Jack that is, pulls him to one side and asks him what is he going to do when he retires. And he says he doesn't know. And Jack is shocked. And then he speaks to Kimmage. He doesn't actually name Kimmage, but he said he spoke to a journalist about a book. And then he explains to him that he wasn't qualified to play for Ireland. So that's the kind of starting point. And then he harks back to his earlier... By the way, he's playing for Nancy for a manager called Laszlo Baloney.
Good old Laszlo Baloney. This is the guy who's got severe, call it ADHD, right? Always turns up at 8 minutes past 8 and stuff. Yeah. They say he's very superstitious, but I think really we have new words for that now, don't we?
Yeah. At the start, he's just going about his daily life, and that's kind of used as as kind of advice to kind of wander into tangents in his past, which I quite enjoyed. I thought that was all very good. And then, yeah, as you said, he introduced The Voice, which is kind of like a Tyler Durden kind of thing, or Black Swan, which is essentially Fight Club for girls.
That's your best quote ever, Johnny. Yeah, so, very quickly, he had a hard childhood. His dad was very aggressive. He used to beat him till he wet himself, apparently. So that's awful. He caught him stealing one time. And
that was grim.
That was grim.
Yeah.
And that could be, where this voice comes from. But, he ends up all right with his dad in the end. His dad he resolves himself. He becomes a better man.
Like, this was a very abusive father. And Cascarino, and this is part of the kind of candor of the book, described himself as kind of soft, and I guess essentially scared, and was, as you say, wetting his bed into his teens and all the rest of it. So, coming from the macho world of football, this is a surprising degree of candor, I think. And you mentioned that the father, kind of reforms himself, but not before his marriage breaks up, his marriage with Tony's mother, and Tony's got a sister, and the sister and the mother kind of turn their back on the father, and Tony weirdly is kind of left being the one that the father comes to kind of rely on, and the father comes and stays with him. But they all eventually do kind of go back to the father in a sense, but both his parents married again. But yeah, they seem to be a much better family maybe later than they were earlier.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. It's interesting you talk about the candor, Johnny, because I think this is what made this book famous. And I kind of feel with it that this actually has been the benchmark for a lot of football autobiographies subsequently. Yeah, I think this is like the 2001 Space Odyssey, and you're like, wow, look at the space stuff. And it's like, well, now we've seen the space stuff done better, but it was the first one. I think that's true, and I think Tony Cascarino did open the door to a lot of navel-gazing football autobiographies.
So our friend Ben sent us an article recently about what and how to read by Janan Ganache in the Financial Times, and it essentially says, don't read anything from the last 20 years. And just allow time to sieve out all of the shit. This article says there's been 120 million unique titles written since the printing press. And he essentially says, why would you bother reading anything in the last few years? But whatever the canon of football, the football oeuvre is, Cascarino's, has survived, even though, it's 25 years ago. So that's why we're reading this book, I guess.
Oh, that is interesting, yeah.
So don't waste your time with James Milner when you can read a football book whenever Cascarino's book came out that year, there would have been books by however many other people, and they haven't survived the test of time in the way that Tony's has.
All right, so let's talk about his career very quickly. So he started at Gillingham. He was brilliant there, and he was brilliant for like 6 seasons. Yeah,
but just before that, and this is something that I think is well known in Ireland, he was a hairdresser. It's rare.
He was a hairdresser, but he wasn't for very long, was it?
18 months.
I suppose so.
And that's
good for him.
18 months when he was 19. Like, you would think taking 18 months out at that stage would kind of stifle your career. Maybe he would have been unbelievable if he hadn't went off.
Well, he's a dab hand with a hair dye, isn't he? He brings that up again and again.
Yes, he does. But yeah, so he was at Gillingham for 6 years. And there's not a whole pile to tell from that period, is there?
No, there's really not. He sounded like he was quite happy, really, during that period.
Yeah. And I think what he says, and this was fun, is I guess it just took him by surprise how amazing the life of a footballer was. That was quite nice. He says something along the lines of, you think it's going to be good, but it is so much better than you can imagine. And he's playing for Gillingham.
This is when he was talking about this, is it? He'd be a hero around town, a big fish in a small pond. He'd play cards all day long, occasionally pop in and see his wife and kids. But he even says that really his wife at that point was just like a a lodger, really. They just both slept in the same bed, but they lived parallel lives where the ships never crossed.
Yeah.
He really hits public consciousness when he goes to Millwall and plays up front with Teddy Sheringham.
Yes.
And that strike force between them take Millwall into the first division for the first time in Millwall's history. And this is when he becomes famous.
So 103 years. The first, and I assume the only time Millwall have been in the top division, because they haven't been since, haven't they?
No, they haven't.
Sorry, he got a call up for the Ireland team when he was at Gillingham. He was called up, but then when Jack Charlton came in, Charlton didn't really fancy him.
No, well, he said the players that were in front of him, but they weren't very inspiring.
Have you seen the Ireland squad recently?
Yeah, well, it's cruel, isn't it? Like we lost to Greece the other day, so
Greece are absolutely amazing, by the way. But anyway,
I mean, we could get onto the Ireland football team. It's sad. I mean, everyone likes Ireland to do well. I mean, and obviously it's not reciprocated, but I think English folk always want Ireland to do well.
If we were actually any good, though, you probably wouldn't. That's just patronising. So go and fuck yourself out.
Well, I mean, maybe it is, but I don't mean it to be, right? Anyway,
do people in England like the Irish rugby team?
Yeah, I don't know. Do they? Probably not.
I don't think so. I don't know.
Who fucking cares? Okay, so anyway, goes to Millwall, gets good friends with Teddy Sheringham, who's 4 years younger than him. Actually calls his son Teddy.
Yes.
Which is a nice little tribute, isn't it?
Yeah, Michael and Teddy. But yeah, he meets his missus around this time as well, and he was really cheating on her from the get-go.
Well, all these women out there wanting his seed, Johnny, what would you do? Yeah, it's horrible. Well, not horrible, but yeah, he actively just cheats all the time and has no conscience about it whatsoever. So from Millwall, this is when he starts hitting the big time, right? He goes to Aston Villa for £1 million.
Yeah. And really he's rubbish.
He's rubbish. So then he goes to Celtic for £1 million.
And really
what's he there?
He's rubbish.
Right then, okay. So then he goes to Chelsea in a swap deal for £1 million player, Chris Boyd.
He's rubbish. Yeah.
Yes. Everywhere he goes, he's rubbish.
Well, he was briefly good at Chelsea, and then he hurt himself playing tennis.
Yeah, that's frustrating, isn't it?
Then he was rubbish again. And this is the first book where anyone has said anything vaguely nice about Dennis Wise.
Oh, was there something I must have missed that, Johnny?
It wasn't nice, but he didn't single him out as being an absolute prick. So from Dennis Wise's point of view, I think that's a bonus.
That's the nicest compliment I've ever received. Someone didn't call me a prick. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and interestingly enough, because we talked about it when we talked about Ian Wright, he didn't really like playing in Scotland, he didn't like playing in Scotland, but he didn't like it for the reasons that you might expect, going and playing away to St. Johnstone or whatever it might be. But he also didn't really particularly like the old firm stuff, which was the same with Ian Wright. He didn't really understand why they had, I think he called it a false war.
I feel this with Ian Wright as well, though. But if it had gone a bit better,
yes,
and
absolutely.
You'd been accepted
1,000 times, yes,
then you'd probably buy into it, wouldn't you? You probably would. Any strikers that have gone up there, say you're Chris Sutton, who went up to Celtic and was a big hit. I mean, he's really into it now. Like, I'm pretty sure Chris Sutton was not born a Catholic, but I think he sees himself as one now, doesn't he?
Yeah, and Hartson or any of those fellas, I'm sure you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, he just didn't. He got the abuse from the Rangers fans, but he was also getting abuse from Celtic fans, so he was just getting it from everywhere.
But he does say exactly as you said there, and it was nice. He says people would take him to one side and say, "Why are you having pints with Ali McCoist?" I said, "Well, because I like Ali McCoist. He's my friend." I said, "Why are you going to the Blue Nose bookies? You should be going to the Celtic bookies. Why are you going to the Blue Nose Golf Club? You should be going to the Celtic Golf Club." And he said, "So I did go to the Blue Nose. I did go to the Celtic bookies, and I did go to the Celtic Golf Club, and I got abuse from the Celtic fans instead of the Rangers fans, which was quite nice."
So, yeah, it was unmitigated disaster, basically, his spelling in Scotland, wasn't it?
He did score against Rangers, which I guess is in his highlight reel. His goals would be a goal for Ireland against England, a goal for Ireland against Germany, a goal for Celtic against Rangers, and then 50 goals in France in the second division.
Yeah, it genuinely is astonishing. He's as famous as he is, really, I think. It's got to do with that Ireland team, right? That Ireland team were all lionised, weren't they? I mean, everyone that was... Is it that?
Oh, no, like, without a doubt. Like, who's an equivalent English player from that era? Like
Crikey. Who's a reserve striker from the...
But anyone who played for Villa at the time, who was playing for Villa at the time as a kind of...
Ian Ormondroyd. There we go. There's one for you.
Well, that would be it, had he not... Like, if Ian Ormondroyd had, qualified for Ireland... Like, yeah, exactly. I'm sure his profile would be as big as Cascarino's.
Yeah, playing international football is huge, isn't it? Because that's how he gets to Marseille. They just say they get relegated from the first division after the Bung scandals. And, yeah, Bernard Tapie, if that's how you pronounce it, was like, oh, get me some internationals in. Get me some internationals who are free.
Yeah, free.
Unfortunately, there's some lumbering lummox at Chelsea who they can't wait to get rid of. And, yeah, so off he goes. Basically because he was an international.
Tapie's a maniac as well. I quite enjoyed all of that.
Oh, he's an absolute maniac. Yeah, I mean, this is the other scandal, wasn't it? Because there's talk of injections at Marseille.
Yeah, and I read a bit about that because Chris Waddle, who didn't play at the same time, he confirmed later that they had been... He confirmed what Cascarino said, that they'd been taking kind of injections. Players were getting injections and not being told what they were. And quite remarkably, Cascarino says that when a player would arrive, essentially they would get this chance, like they'd have to take this injection and they'd kind of understand that this was not a negotiable thing, they had to do it. And Bernard Tapie would come into the changing room and lift up his shirt, and whatever it was some kind of needle gun with like 20 needles, and he would put it into his own back. That's wild.
Well, Tony said it did make him feel sharper and gave him more energy. So, yep.
And Tony says, I like to tell myself that it was legal, but I'm fairly certain it was not. I'd say Tony didn't give a shit, actually.
No, I don't think he would have changed his fucking passport with a biro.
Exactly. The Ireland stuff. So, what does he say about Ireland? There are some fun bits in and around the hotels, essentially. Like anything, I think Irish football fans would like read anything Charlton related. His very first call up for Ireland, which under Charlton, he's caught shadow boxing with Kevin Sheedy while they're training, which is obviously pretty innocuous stuff. But Charlton has a total meltdown and just roars at them. And apparently Charlton had a real bee in his bonnet about Kevin Sheedy for whatever reason. But yeah, it's funny how, again, I think I talked about this before in the context of Manchester United, just little crumbs about the eras that we're interested in are enough to nourish us, it seems. There's another more Cascarino type moment where he smuggled a girl into the, like this is when he's married, smuggled a girl into the team hotel ahead of the World Cup, maybe, and this information was leaked to the hotel, said there was an intruder, essentially. And then the following day, Charlton went around and asked every player, like, were you the person who brought in the girl? And they said, no, but he didn't ask Cascarino. So then Cascarino was wondering, did he actually know? And then Cascarino came clean, and Charlton just has a huge meltdown, roars at him, and there are journalists nearby because it's on the training ground. And Cascarino's thinking, calm the fuck down, man. And then Charlton said something like, well, I hope she was worth it. And that was the end of it. He said that was it. Once Charlton had vented his frustration, that was it. And he compared it to when Hoddle had Teddy Sheringham read out an apology letter for the press after he was caught drinking ahead of the World Cup in 1998.
Well, there's some delicious Hoddle stuff here, isn't there? Like
There is good. There's really good Hoddle stuff. Hoddle really is one of the most mentioned characters, isn't he?
He is, isn't he? Because he was so good. I just think he was so good before our time. I mean, the way people talk about Glenn Hoddle.
But so good and so weird, though. Not just an asshole, but a weirdo.
Yeah, total weirdo. I mean, he if Hoddle can handle something rightly or wrongly, he will handle it wrongly, right? I mean, I think we've learned that over the years. But there's other things. And this is what I want to talk about. Like, famously, Hoddle used to be able to do things in training that his players couldn't do. But Cascarino talks about this exercise where 10 players would stand around a player in the middle. You'd chip the ball to the player in the middle.
Yeah.
He would get a touch to control it, and then he would have to pass it on to a nominated player. It doesn't sound that hard to me, Johnny.
But what he says is the thing that annoyed him and the other players. It was not that they couldn't do it. It was just that Hoddle just made a point of kind of embarrassing all of them. That was what.
Yeah.
Do you remember when Roy Keane was managing Sunderland, and famously he signed that keeper Gordon?
Yeah, the Scottish keeper.
The Scottish lad. And in training, he was upset with Gordon, and he spent big money on Gordon, and he got in goal to prove a point to Gordon, like that it wasn't hard to do whatever it was. But I remember this being talked about at the time as an example of how Keane wasn't really great at maybe the psychology of management, you know. It wasn't a great motivation to be embarrassed by your manager who wasn't even a goalkeeper.
Just on the Roy Keane, there is a Roy Keane story, isn't there? Like, and it's fairly typical Keane. Just when he was a youth player, like 20 years old, he was with the Ireland squad.
They were
all on the bus. They had to wait like half an hour for Roy Keane. He gets on. Jack Charlton unloads on him. And apparently Keano was there, just dead-eyed, didn't even blink. It's like, I didn't ask you to wait for me. And just walked off like, oh, Keano. Oh, you got to love the man.
Well, I said that we would, you know, sustain ourselves on little crumbs of the 90s Irish football team. Give us anything Keane related. we will eat it off the floor.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, he'd been out on the beer, Keane, in that story, which obviously is something he didn't do all that much later on. But those boys were drinking, like they were having a wild time. And we're talking about being transported in recent episodes to Rio de Janeiro and to Mallorca. What about being transported to Dublin hotels in the early 1990s?
It sounds pretty fun, doesn't it, Johnny? It does sound fun.
Yeah. This was striking, actually. They were on an away game, and himself, Ray Houghton, Andy Townsend, and John Aldridge went into a big bar that was full of away Irish fans. What's striking about those four players?
None of them born in Ireland.
None of them born in Ireland. And he said at some point, Aldridge just disappeared. And they were like, where the fuck is Aldridge? And they looked around and he had scored a goal on this trip. And they looked around and he was essentially crowd surfing in the bar. He was being passed around the place. Like, that is fun stuff.
Yeah, it really is fun stuff. Yeah, I mean, it just sounds... I mean, they're just like a fucking fun band of mercenaries, aren't they? That Ireland squad, like, from the early 90s. Yeah, and you just got the great ringleader in Jack, eh? But yeah, it sounds awfully fun. It really does. And at least he's not trying to hide behind some sad alcoholic story. He's having a lovely old time, isn't he?
Yeah.
He just feels sorry for himself and he can't stop shagging birds for some reason. Oh, poor me. What could I do? I had to.
Yeah, like
I mean, I get it, right? He's in his 20s. You marry young, like, of course, I get it.
Yeah, well, I suppose this is the candor, though, isn't it? Because I assume he wasn't the only one who was at this, but he just wrote it in a book.
Yeah, he certainly did write it in a book. He certainly did. And he doesn't drop anyone else in it at all, does he, in the whole book? I don't think at any point does he really slag anyone off, apart from Glenn Hoddle.
Hoddle, and he says there's one player he played for at Nancy who was smelly. But he doesn't name him. He calls him X. Smelly and tight. Oh, yeah.
And he also says he has a roommate at Nancy, a young kid who used to tell him things that no man should never tell another man. Like, I mean, he'd be destroyed in England. What was he telling him? He was like breastfed till he was like 15 or something. What was he telling him? I wish he told us.
Yeah, he said that some of those French guys wouldn't have made it in an English dressing room. A friend of mine, an Irish fella who lives in France, was telling me he plays, paddle, which is it's like tennis, very popular in France. And he plays with these French lads. And in the lead up to Christmas, they were asking him, would he get involved in a Secret Santa with them? And he was like, what? What the hell are you talking about? So maybe that's the kind of thing.
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with a Secret Santa?
Well, that is totally fine, obviously, but 4 Irish lads wouldn't go in for a Secret Santa between themselves,
Okay, I see what you mean now, yeah. Okay, yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. It sounds quite sweet, though. It's just we're all a bunch of arseholes.
Well, exactly. That's kind
Imagine buying a present for your friend. Ridiculous. No way, pussies.
I know. Well, that's essentially the sentiment, isn't it? And I guess that's the sentiment that Tony was probably expressing too.
Yes, I think yes, you're absolutely right. We're incredibly repressed as people, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want that.
Bracer.
I don't want my friend knowing that I like him. He played under Brady at Celtic. And Brady, this was nice, like that when he went to play for Ireland, he just was kind of starstruck by Brady. And then, of course, they became friends, and then he went to play for him at Celtic and was absolutely shit for him. And that was kind of the end of their relationship, it was interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting. And it seemed quite sad, wasn't it? Because they had an altercation and he said, I've not done anything wrong, Gaffer. And he said, you've always called me Liam before. And that was the end of their friendship.
And left the room, yeah, that was the end of it, yeah. That stuff about at Chelsea as well was fun. He started well, but then he quickly became a byword for shitness around Chelsea, and he, or someone at least, overheard Ken Bates calling him a fucking disaster. And then they were trying to sign someone else, and Ken Bates was like, I don't think so. I'm just worried that we'll have another Tony Cascarino situation.
Well, just very quickly talk about when he first went up with Millwall. He's talking about that was the time of his life, and he was like, I was living my dream. I hit the post at Anfield. I thought that was satire. Everything was going perfect. I hit the post. You didn't score at Anfield. You hit the post. It's funny, isn't it? Like, you read all these different autobiographies, and it's just a different scale of things. Like, yeah, there's old Garrincha scoring in World Cup semis and stuff, and old fucking Cascarino's getting all hot and teary-eyed, nostalgic about hitting the post at Anfield. Like, I remember we lost and I hit the post.
It's a credit to the craftsmanship of the author that the book is good. It's a Grincher one, but we can get to that in a minute.
Well, we can have an argument, and if that's what you think. Okay, well, I've got my heckles up now, Johnny. All right. Should we move on? So his time in France very quickly, because this is his redeeming thing, right? He's kind of like his career fizzled out in England.
Yeah. So he gets this Indian summer essentially, which went on for quite a while.
Quite a fucking while, right? I mean, he seemed an absolute busted flush at 32, but played for another 5 years. Like
as you said, so he was fortunate because of this weird quirk where Marseille had been relegated. But had that not happened, he never would have went to France, If Marseille hadn't been a bunch of cheaters, he never would have went to France. He never would have played for Marseille, and of course he never would have played for Nancy, and he would have finished his career playing for, going back to Gillingham or something like that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's what sounded like to me, that he would end up going back to Gillingham.
But instead, he becomes Tony Goal, and it's totally different. It's like, playing for Nancy and playing for Gillingham is probably, they're probably not that far away from each other in any sporting sense, but it's just so much cooler.
Yeah, although Nancy he equates with, it's the French equivalent of Barnsley. So that put it in perspective for me. Because you hear, Nancy, that sounds nice, doesn't it? You just, Nancy, I bet that's lovely. But no, it's just French Barnsley.
Hometown of Michel Platini. So he scores goals right from the get-go. He's scoring hat-tricks and stuff. He's spinning the ball on his finger when he goes to France.
Yeah, he can do no wrong.
Yeah, and
But but this is the first time he starts taking shit seriously as well, though, right? He cuts back on the drinking. He tries to stay fit for the first time.
grandfather time was coming from, I suppose, so he started being a little bit more clean living. But yeah, as you say, he reaped the rewards.
And that's the other perspective from this book, which is 25 years old, is the money he's earning. As his career is coming to an end, he hasn't got millions in the bank. He doesn't have these huge endorsement deals. In fact, he breaks it down. He's on about $8,000 a month, he says, right, at Nancy. And there's some bonuses and on, but he talks about the money he's earned. At the point he wrote the book, he's earned about £2 million, it says. But then he goes through all the breakdowns and how much money he actually had left.
It's always funny in these books, isn't it? Because, footballers from that generation do often complain about having missed the big time money-wise, but they were always wealthy, wildly, in comparison to everyone else at any given time after, we'll say, what, the 80s?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, he was earning well. And on the other side of things, I heard a footballer talking recently saying, people think they want to be footballers, but the actual reality is you're in bed by 9, you don't go out, it's very boring. But that wasn't the case for these lads, was it? As long as they turned up for training and turned up on match day, they could do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. All that free time was just boozing, fun, shagging, cards.
Yeah, they were rock stars.
Nowadays, obviously, you'd take the money, wouldn't you? Obviously, if you could be saying, would you like to earn $100,000 a week? Yes, I would like to earn that. But you can't drink. Okay, I'll do it. But would you like to earn $2,000 a week and you drink as much as you like and shag away? So yeah, I would like that. Yeah, it's different, isn't it?
Well, you say that. Have you ever heard of a band called Los Campesinos?
I have a Los Campesinos, yes.
So they have a song called All Your Kayfabe Friends, and the line in the song is, you asked if I'd be anyone from history, fact or fiction, dead or alive. I said I'd be Tony Cascarino, circa 1995. So it seems you're wrong. Not everyone would take the money and play now. Some people would rather be Tony Cascarino in 1995.
Yeah, it would be fucking great to be immortalised in a song, wouldn't it? Even if it is such luminaries as Los Campesinos. They were pretty good back in the day, weren't they? I'm pretty sure I had an album by them.
Tony is eventually a victim of his own success because his goals... He has a bet with Bernard Tapie, who offers him 15 grand, a bet if he can score more than 20 goals in a season, and he takes the bet, and he scores 20 goals by November. Yeah. Which I'd say he probably had scored 20 goals in the previous 6 or 7 years, And then, but he was a victim of his own success because these goals brought Marseille back up. So, and Nancy were in League One anyway.
Oh, that's right. So he played a few games for Marseille, but they decided, and Nancy were bottom of the league, weren't they? And he did get relegated with them, but he did a great job.
Cascarino holds the League One record for oldest player to score a hat-trick, which he did at the age of 37 and 31 days. It's funny to think of all these people, ancient footballers, who are significantly younger than me.
Yeah, that's it. I look at him and just think, look at this old bastard. Yeah, that's it. And you are significantly younger than me, so that's absolutely awful.
Anyway, so he goes to Nancy. They're in League On. They get relegated, but they come back up. But then at that stage, he's kind of had enough. And I suppose what we talked about it a bit at the start in his personal life, but the book is probably as much about his marriage as it is about his football career, right? Yeah,
I really think so. That's why I say he wrote it for himself. I think he wrote it for himself to make himself feel a bit better about basically being a love rat.
Yeah, and it does, whatever, who am I to judge or anything, but it is funny. He is remembered and loved in Ireland, but he is a bit of a fucker.
Yeah, he seems that way to me. I feel like I knew who Tony Cascarino was, but then I thought about it, and I can't really remember seeing him much on TV. Maybe little bits and pieces on TalkSport 20 years ago, but I'm not familiar with anything he does nowadays.
Yeah, you see him on ads for betting companies.
Oh, these lads, so it's incredible what it did for their careers, that that mid-90s Ireland team. All these players are just immortalised in a way they just would
Yeah,
never have been if they'd been playing for any other country.
the profile to talent ratio with Cascarino is probably, however you would describe that, is probably the most, it's like he got the most profile out of the most limited career, most limited talent. Really, there's not many who match him in that respect.
No, I mean the one I was going to say, which is a step up, but it's like Beckham in a way. And obviously Beckham was a world-class footballer, but he was never like one of the top 10 footballers in the world at any point. But he was the most famous, if you see what I'm saying. I don't know if it's a great analogy, but you know what? I
No,
see what you're saying.
I get
In
the
terms
point.
of his talent, he's much more famous than he is talented.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I can't even think of anyone else. Well, probably other members of that Ireland team, but I can't really think of others who he still has a profile 25 years later. And what did he really achieve in football? Not all that much. Like 6
No.
years. 6 years at Gillingham.
Yeah, and his whole youth at Gillingham. Yeah, I mean, he never got any profile till he was in his late 20s. He never played in the top division till he was in his late 20s.
And when he did that, he didn't do it very well.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's interesting. Yeah, so that is true. Tony Cascarino is much more famous than he is talented. Now I'm desperately trying to think of another footballer who's like that.
That's kind of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Towards the end of the book, he really is. He has really. He's grown tired of it, and he signs for a third division team in France called Red Star 93. But then Nancy offer him a contract subsequent to that, but he's already made a promise, or well, I'd say he wouldn't give a shit about a promise. He's already signed a contract. It says it after, like in a postscript in the book, that he terminated his contract after a few weeks because he only played twice and didn't fancy it anymore. Just as a funny aside, he was in a thing on Irish television called Celebrity Banishtore. Banishtore is the Irish language word for manager. So they would get these quote unquote celebrities to come and manage Gaelic football teams. And I looked at the list. He did it. He actually did it in the little village outside my hometown. Where my wife is actually from this village, Kaleshin Gaelic football team, and he won it, season 4 of Celebrity Banishtore. But it's like the names. I looked up the various people who did it. There's been 5 series, and I'd say the only person that you would have heard of otherwise was Callum Best.
Not bad.
But let me just read this line for you because I just thought it was absolutely wonderful. Let me find it. Okay, there was a woman in Ireland called Dana, actually, sorry, Dana. She was from Donegal. She won the Eurovision in 1970, I think. It was the first time.
No, I've heard of her. I know who she is, yeah.
Yeah, okay. But she was the only other person then that you would have heard of from Celebrity Banishtore. But then she was in it in 2011, the same year as Cascarino, and she left the contest. She left the series to contest the 2011 Irish presidential election, which I just thought was absolutely hilarious.
Well, she is a good manager. Very good.
Oh God, Rosemary Scandal, I think is her name. But she didn't win the presidential election, so she should have stuck with Celebrity Banishtore, which was won by Tony Cascarino that year.
So he was just the manager of a Gaelic football team, and his Gaelic football team won.
Yeah.
Is the president of Ireland that little funny fella, that little
and
elf-looking chap?
Yeah, he won that election actually that she contested, and his presidential term in Ireland is 7 years, and he's won it twice.
Do you like him? I like him just to look at him. Is he a good guy?
Yeah, he is a good guy. He's a lovely man. I think he's a really nice man. Yeah, and he's a good figurehead as well. He's got he looks a bit funny, but he's got kind of presidential vibes in the sense that he's been throughout his political career. He was good. He was decent. Like, you know, he wasn't.
Yeah, he seems like a decent man. He just looks like he should be working at Gringotts. But
yeah, you really. If the role of the head of state is to look like the most stereotypical person from that country, he's doing a good job. Yeah.
All right. So then, what do you think out of 5? So Johnny, you've already made quite a bold statement. This book was as good as the Garincha book.
Yeah, I think it was. Here are the caveats. The Brazil stuff is more interesting, the context. But this book is better written. This book is, at times it's unusually, like, I've said candid 1,000 times, but it really is an interesting insight into his mind. It could be entirely dishonest because he does seem like a very dishonest character. But I thought it was really interesting for all those reasons, and I think a lot of credit goes to Kimmage. I think he's done a great job with this book. What was the line you said earlier? They want to have sex with a champion, and they want his seed.
Straddle a champion and have his seed.
I would give this 4 straddles of a champion.
Oh, I don't want to straddle any champion.
Oh.
I mean, I enjoyed it too. I definitely enjoyed the Garincha book more, but then that's because Garincha was arguably the greatest player on the planet at that time, whereas Tony Cascarino was Tony Cascarino. I mean, it's fair enough. But I rattled through it, and as I say, I'd recommend this book to anyone because you could read it in 2.5 hours. It's an easy read. There's some laughs along the way. I'll give it 4 out of 5 as well. 4 seeds out of 5. It's a good book. And it's a fun book, and it's quite interesting about a very mediocre player. Yeah,
much like his career, he's drained every drop here and done a great book from a mediocre career.
Yeah, and these lads, they should fucking thank fucking Jack Charlton every day of his life, because without Jack Charlton, Tony Cascarino would just be lost to history, right? He would be just a mediocre striker.
Yeah,
no one would remember his name.
Yeah, he wouldn't even be able to go to celebrity poker tournaments.
No, and Celebrity Bannister, that would not be happening.
No, absolutely not.
Did I say that wrong?
No, that was all right.
So, on the next episode, we will be doing the recently departed Sven-Göran Eriksson's A Beautiful Game book. So, from a golden age of Irish football to a golden generation of English footballers,
well,
for what that was worth.
Just to keep with that conversation about Cascarino, Eriksson, for his abysmal performance as England manager, somehow, and this is before his sad death recently, somehow remained really well liked in England, despite being absolutely appalling. So maybe he has something in common with Tony there.
Sven-Göran Eriksson. It was a 5-1 against Germany. After that, he basically could do no wrong. And then he shagged Ulrika. It's just like, whoa, what a boy. What a boy. Yeah, we love him, right? We love him. He's just a cool guy, though. Well, we'll find out, won't we?
We will find out, yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much, Alistair, and thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you to Dara for the music as well.
And thank you, most of all, to Barry Coughlin for the wonderful suggestion for the Garincha book. I am eternally in your debt, buddy. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, that sounded unnecessarily snide. Thanks, I did enjoy the book, and it wasn't really my idea, and I did enjoy that book most of it anymore. So thank you, Barry.
Yes, thank you, Barry. Okay, thank you very much, Al.